I remember the exact moment she said it, her words hanging in the air like smoke I couldn't breathe through. "I'm leaving the apartment. You can have it, if you dare." The words weren't just a statement, they were a gauntlet thrown at my feet. I stood frozen, the keys in my hand feeling heavier than any weight I had ever carried. The deposit money and 10 months of rent I had already paid flashing through my mind like a neon warning sign. It wasn't just an apartment she was leaving behind. It was everything we had built together. The tiny universe we had constructed in peeling paint, overstuffed bookshelves, and the faint smell of coffee that always seemed to linger in the morning sun. I didn't react immediately. I didn't shout, didn't plead, didn't collapse into tears. I looked at her with a calmness I didn't entirely feel, the kind of calmness that masks a storm brewing underneath. "Challenge accepted," I said, my voice steady, almost too steady. Like a movie hero stepping onto the battlefield without hesitation. She blinked at me, the disbelief so palpable it almost had a sound. And in that silence, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding like a drum in my chest. It wasn't just pride keeping me from panicking. It was curiosity, the kind that curls around your mind and won't let go until you've pulled every string, flipped every stone, and seen exactly what lies beneath. She thought she was walking away with all the leverage, that the apartment, the keys, the deposit money, and the comfort of familiarity were enough to break me. But she underestimated the way I think, the way I strategize when I feel cornered. I left her in the apartment, standing there with her coat half on, the sunlight slicing through the blinds across her face, and I didn't look back. I needed a plan, and I needed an ally. My phone felt heavier than ever in my pocket as I scrolled through my contacts until I found the one person I knew would understand the gravity of the situation, the landlord. But he wasn't just anyone. He was my childhood friend, the guy who had watched me scrape knees, cry over heartbreaks, and dream foolish dreams. If there was anyone who would help me navigate this chaos, it was him. I dialed the number and held the phone to my ear, listening to the familiar ring, trying to steady my thoughts. "Hey," I said when he picked up, "I need a favor. Big one." I laid out the entire situation, her ultimatum, the deposit, the rent I'd already paid, and the fact that she was planning to walk out tomorrow as if nothing had happened. His response was immediate, a mix of surprise and a little mischievous excitement. "You want me to transfer the lease to your name?" he asked. I could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "Exactly," I said. "Everything, today, before she realizes what's happening." As we spoke, I realized that the tension in my chest had shifted from fear to something else entirely, anticipation. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about power, about proving that I could navigate the storm she had started, about seeing the truth of her intentions laid bare. There was a thrill in that, a dangerous thrill, the kind that makes your pulse quicken and your mind sharpen like a blade. The transfer wasn't simple. There were forms, signatures, and legal technicalities, each one a potential pitfall, a moment where she could catch on and turn the tables. But my childhood friend knew the loopholes, the exact phrasing that would allow the lease to shift without delay. We coordinated in whispered tones over the phone, each instruction precise, each confirmation a small victory. And all the while, I could feel her presence in my apartment like a shadow just beyond the corner of my vision. As if she could sense that something was happening, even if she didn't know what. By mid-afternoon, everything was in motion. The forms were signed electronically, the lease was set to be transferred, and I felt a curious mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. She still thought she had the upper hand, still believed that walking out would leave me scrambling. But the real game was just beginning. The apartment, once our shared sanctuary, was becoming a battlefield, and every decision, every calculated move, was a step closer to uncovering the truth. She had buried beneath casual smiles and whispered promises. I checked my phone compulsively, waiting for the inevitable messages, the first signs of panic or outrage. And when they came, I wasn't disappointed. The texts were short at first: questions, incredulity, disbelief, but each one grew sharper, more frantic, as the reality of what had happened sank in. She wasn't just leaving. She was realizing that she had lost control. The lease, once a symbol of her power, was no longer hers, and in that moment, I saw the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. The human underneath the bravado, the fear beneath the fury. As evening fell and the apartment grew dim under the weight of twilight, I sat alone in the space that had once been ours. The sunlight no longer illuminated her face, but the empty corners where shadows stretched long and thin. I thought about what had brought us here, the whispered promises, the later-night arguments, the laughter and love that had once filled these rooms. And I realized that this wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about understanding, about seeing the truth clearly, about confronting the person I had loved and discovering who they really were. The first chapter of this confrontation wasn't over. She would call, she would text, she would try to reclaim the narrative. But I had started something that couldn't be undone. I had taken a step into a game she hadn't even realized she was playing. A game where stakes weren't measured in money or property, but in trust, deception, and the fragile, volatile nature of love itself. Every message from her now was a thread, and I had the needle. Every glance at my phone was a step closer to the revelation that was waiting. The truth she had tried to hide, the consequences she had never considered. And as the night deepened and the city outside settled into its quiet hum, I understood that the real story was only beginning. This wasn't just an ultimatum. It was the start of a reckoning, and I was ready to see it through, no matter how deep the darkness might stretch. The morning sunlight crept through the blinds, slicing thin lines of gold across the floor, and with it came the first wave of panic. My phone buzzed relentlessly, each notification a spark of chaos. Her messages had started simple. "What the hell did you do?" Followed by a series of frantic emojis and exclamation points that seemed almost comical against the gravity of the situation. But beneath the surface, I sensed something darker, her realization that control was slipping, that the narrative she had carefully constructed was unraveling with every passing minute. I didn't respond immediately. I knew better than to give her the satisfaction of my reaction. Instead, I sat back, letting the words sink in, studying the pattern of her panic, the way she tried to assert dominance through volume and repetition, as if yelling digitally could reclaim the apartment she was losing. And then I called my childhood friend, the landlord, whose calm, precise tone was a stark contrast to the storm erupting on my screen. "Everything's in place?" I asked, my voice steady, though my pulse still drummed like a warning bell. "Everything," he replied. "Lease is in your name. She won't be able to reverse it without a legal battle, and even then, the paperwork is airtight. She won't see it coming." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, feeling the thrill of anticipation coiling tight in my chest. This was more than just a transaction. This was strategy, chess played on a real-life board where the pieces were people, emotions, and secrets. And I, for the first time, was leading the game. The next hours were a delicate dance. Every time my phone buzzed, I had to decide whether to respond, escalate, or wait. Her tone shifted as she realized the lease was legally binding. The messages became frantic and confessional, almost desperate, revealing not just anger but hints of regret, betrayal, and secrets she had never shared. Each revelation was a puzzle piece, slowly forming an image I hadn't anticipated, a side of her I had never truly seen. Even after months of intimacy and shared mornings, I started to see the patterns in her deception, the motives behind the choices she had made. Every casual dismissal, every fleeting moment of coldness suddenly made sense, and with each realization, I felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. This wasn't just about the apartment. It was about the foundation of trust we had built, crumbling under the weight of hidden truths. But I couldn't act recklessly. I had to maintain the calm, the air of control that had kept her off balance since the moment she had thrown down her ultimatum. I texted selectively, asking probing questions that seemed innocuous but were designed to draw out more information. And she obliged, unable to resist the need to explain herself, justify her actions, and cling to the fragments of influence she still possessed. By mid-afternoon, the tension had reached a fever pitch. I could almost hear her pacing through her own apartment, the frantic tap of her fingers against her phone, the shallow breaths as she realized how thoroughly the situation had shifted. My childhood friend called back, confirming that every clause, every stipulation had been executed perfectly. There was no way for her to reverse the lease, no loophole left unguarded. The apartment, once the center of her power, was now mine legally, irrevocably. and in a way that exposed the core of her intentions. I remembered the small details that now seemed crucial, the way she had laughed when I first suggested covering the deposit, the subtle smirks, the fleeting glances that had hinted at plans I hadn't suspected. They were all pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, painted a picture of someone far more cunning than I had given her credit for. But in this moment, it was clear that the game had flipped. She had gambled on me being reactive, impulsive, and emotional. Instead, I had become the calm center, the one orchestrating the unfolding storm. By evening, I decided it was time to confront the truths she had been hiding, but in a controlled, deliberate way. I opened her latest string of panicked messages and selected just one that hinted at a secret she could no longer contain. I replied simply, "Tell me everything, now." The pause before her response was electric, a suspended moment that felt as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then the floodgates opened. The truths spilled out, each message heavier than the last. Admissions of doubt, confessions of past manipulations, and revelations about choices she had made under pressure. All of it became clear in stark, unfiltered text. I read every word with a mixture of disbelief and clarity. The person I thought I knew, the partner I had loved, was simultaneously familiar and utterly unknown. And yet, beneath the shock and betrayal, there was a strange liberation, a sense that finally, the masks had fallen, and we were seeing each other fully, brutally. Without pretense, through the night, the dialogue continued, a tense, relentless exchange that felt like a war fought with words rather than weapons. I learned of fears she had buried, of pressures she had hidden behind smiles, and of plans she had thought she could execute undetected. And in learning these things, I began to understand the depth of her strategy, and the depth of mine. Every step I had taken, every calculated decision, was now illuminated by the truths she had finally been forced to reveal. As midnight approached, I realized that this wasn't merely about the lease or the apartment. It was about the raw, unvarnished reality of two people entangled in love, pride, deception, and desperation. And in this realization, I found clarity. The battle wasn't over yet, but I knew the rules, the stakes, and the vulnerabilities, mine and hers. The chessboard was set, the pieces exposed, and the game had entered its most dangerous phase. Total transparency. I closed my phone for a moment and looked around the apartment, the space now entirely mine. Each familiar object, tower, coffee mugs, the shared couch, the scattered books, felt different under the weight of truth. Ownership had shifted, yes, but more importantly, perspective had shifted. I wasn't just inheriting a lease. I was inheriting knowledge, leverage, and the ability to navigate a landscape I had never fully understood until now. And so, I waited. Not passively, but with strategic patience. Every message, every glance, every hesitation would be a move in this high-stakes game. She had opened the door to a confrontation she had never anticipated, and I was ready to see how far it could go, what secrets would surface next, and whether love, trust, or deception would ultimately claim victory. The morning after the lease transfer felt different, almost surreal. The apartment, once a shared space filled with laughter, arguments, and whispered secrets, was now a stage set for revelation. Her messages had slowed overnight, but the tension remained palpable, like the quiet before a storm breaks. I could sense that she was gathering herself, weighing her next move, calculating how much of the truth she dared reveal and how much she would try to manipulate. But this time, the advantage was mine. When her first message came in, it was almost cautious. "I don't know how you did this. I need to talk." The simplicity of the words belied the hurricane behind them. I took a moment before replying, savoring the moment when control had shifted, when the power balance had tilted. "Then talk. Tell me everything. No filters." It was an invitation and a challenge. A clear signal that the game had entered its final act. Her response was immediate, a deluge of confessions. Truths she had hidden behind charm, misdirection, and carefully timed vulnerability. She admitted the doubts that had plagued her, the moments she had considered leaving before, and the manipulations she had orchestrated to test me. Every revelation was a blow, a shard of clarity piercing through the haze of our past. And with each message, I felt a strange mixture of anger, sadness, and, oddly enough, relief. The masks had fallen, the hidden layers peeled back, and for the first time, I saw her entirely, without illusion. We met that evening in the apartment that now legally belonged to me, yet still carried traces of her presence. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that makes every movement significant, every glance loaded with meaning. She entered cautiously, eyes scanning, as if assessing the battlefield. I didn't stand. I didn't move. I simply let her presence fill the space, letting her feel the full weight of what had transpired. "I didn't think you'd do it," she said, voice trembling slightly. I thought I had more control." There was a flicker of vulnerability there, a glimpse of the person she had tried to conceal behind layers of confidence and bravado. I nodded, letting her words settle between us. "Control isn't given. It's taken," I replied evenly, watching as the impact of my words registered. We talked for hours, a raw, unfiltered exchange where no topic was off limits. She revealed motives I had never suspected, insecurities she had buried deep, and fears that had driven her actions. I shared my perspective too, though carefully, emphasizing what I had learned, what I had understood from the messages she had sent in panic and confession. Every word, every pause, was part of the negotiation, the dance of truth and reconciliation. The revelations cut deep. I learned about choices she had made that directly contradicted what she had told me, manipulations designed to test my loyalty, and moments of betrayal that I had only glimpsed indirectly. Yet, alongside the hurt, there was a strange sense of clarity. The game we had been playing in the shadows of secrecy was now exposed to light, and in that exposure, the rules were rewritten. We could no longer hide behind pretense, could no longer assume illusions of trust. Everything was laid bare. By midnight, the apartment felt transformed. It was no longer just a physical space. It had become a crucible, a place where truth, deception, love, and pride had collided and reshaped the landscape of our relationship. We sat on the couch, side by side, but with the weight of everything between us. And in that silence, I realized that what had begun as a conflict over property and pride had evolved into something far more profound, a reckoning of hearts, of intentions, of the fragile architecture of trust. Her final confession came unexpectedly, a single line that struck with the force of lightning. "I never wanted to leave you, but I needed to know if you could stand without me." The honesty was both simple and devastating. It revealed a love that had been tested by fear, by ego, and by circumstance. A love that had hidden itself behind challenges and ultimatums to see if it would endure. And in that moment, I understood the complexity of our connection, the interplay of desire, fear, and the human need for validation. I didn't respond immediately. I let the words settle, letting the truth sink into the room like sunlight through dust. And then I reached out, taking her hand, feeling the tremor of her vulnerability. I didn't just stand. I moved forward, I said softly. Not because of the apartment, not because of control, but because I believed in us, even when you tried to test it. Her eyes glistened, a mixture of tears and understanding. For the first time, the tension that had hung over us for days seemed to dissipate, replaced by a fragile, honest connection. The apartment, the lease, the chaos of messages, all of it had served as a crucible, exposing the raw essence of who we were and what we meant to each other in the following days. The dynamics between us shifted profoundly. We rebuilt trust from the fragments of revelation, acknowledging mistakes and motivations alike. Conversations that once would have been avoided became open explorations of intent and consequence. And as we navigated this new terrain, I realized that the true victory had never been about legal documents or deposits. It had been about clarity, honesty, and the courage to confront the hidden corners of our hearts. The apartment, once a battlefield, became a symbol of renewal. Every room, every object, carried the memory of conflict, but also the promise of understanding. We moved forward with a new awareness of each other, a recognition that love is neither simple nor static, but a delicate interplay of trust, risk, and revelation. And as we sat together, watching the sun set through the blinds, I understood the ultimate truth. Sometimes, love demands confrontation, courage, and exposure to the harsh light of reality. Only by facing the shadows, by challenging and being challenged, could we truly see each other and choose to stay.